Wow, this is wonderful to look out and see so many people. I'm very, very happy to be here. Thank you, Professor Ringelberg, for inviting me, and for all of you for being here today. Just so much enthusiasm. It's been really cool to see the social media coming out. I'm going, wow, these people are really going to show up for this, which is great. I've never had such a really warm welcome like this. I have kind of a little 5-part plan here, what I want to talk about, and I wanted to give you a layout of what it is. So the first part, I would like to just discuss a little bit about my inspiration for my approach, how I go about my work, and then we'll do a little bit of a museum snapshot and think about state of the field, the way things are. And I do focus on art museums, so sometimes I'm using the word museums, and a lot of it does apply to other types of museums, but I'm mainly focused in art museums. I will talk about some collaborations that I've worked on, the Art of Black Descent, that Professor Ringelberg mentioned, and Museums Are Not Neutral. You see the T, and there's actually quite a few students and other folks here today, and faculty wearing the shirts. I also will be talking about going beyond talking, an action plan, and some resources. And I have this set up to be somewhat conversational. I didn't write this out as a typed paper, so just keep that in mind. That can be good or bad, I guess. I do think about art broadly. So my dissertation work, as mentioned, I'm focusing on landscapes of lynching, and they really focus on things in public space. But I do have a background of thinking about objects that are in museum collections as well. So I do approach the things in public space as art, and I pay attention to signs and just things that maybe some other people who are really doing a more conservative kind of approach to art history might not consider it as art objects, but I think all of these different forms of visual culture are important to consider. And let me see what else I want to say with that. So public art, memorials, museums, I focus on public memory issues. And my own background, my father was in the military, moved around a lot. I come from very small towns in the U.S., and I think that's it. My parents also were not college educated folks. And I came to, let's see how we move forward here. I came to thinking about museums work. I grew up going to museums from age 6. So that it's not actually odd to me to go to art museums, but I never thought about working in one and making decisions and things like that. And I didn't come from a background of people who really had that kind of experience. In the last 10 years, I've been working in various museums off and on in different kind of spaces. And I'm now on my 7th museum that I've worked at. So I've kind of built up an understanding of different institutions, and mainly art museums, but also some history museums and house museums. But when I think about what inspires me, I have to say it's artists and activists and writers, visual artists, and I guess literary artists we can think of. It's not actually the museum people so much, a little bit, but they're not really the main inspiration for me. I can think of a few folks that I say are really important, but really it's people like this woman, Ida B. Wells. Are you all familiar with Ida B. Wells? I hope many people are. I didn't grow up learning much at all about Ida B. Wells as a kid. I knew her face because she was on the cover of our, or not the cover, but she was in the Black History calendars that my mom would buy. So she would be one of the faces that I grew up seeing, and I really only had an opportunity to read a couple of lines about what she did. And it wasn't until I went to graduate school that I came to know her work, and I was in not actually graduate school, it was undergrad. I took a class, African American Women's Autobiographies, and we got to look at Wells's biography, Crusade for Justice, and I became extremely impressed by this woman. Her commitment and her fierceness, that what work she was doing, it's something that it just continues to just resonate for me, and I just think, I want to be like Ida B. Wells. And I'm just putting that out there because the type of work I do consider it kind of like an activist role, and some people will have described me as a protester and an activist working in an art museum. I do not consider that an insult. I think they've said it as an insult, but I don't think it is, because I think there's a lot of things to change in our society and make them better. And if I'm going to go at it really hard, and many other people, to align myself with somebody like Ida B. Wells, which I'm not even doing anything nearly as dangerous as her. And I think my work is important, but it's not like the work she was doing. She was fighting lynching violence. This woman was from Mississippi, had moved to Memphis, and was basically run out of town because she was highlighting lynching violence that was happening in the city, and they burned down the place where she was working. She ran a newspaper and everything. She ended up traveling around the country, giving talks about lynching violence. This is all the 19th century, going into the 20th century. She also traveled abroad and did a lot of speaking engagements in England. And I'm just always really impressed with the work that Ida B. Wells did. So I actually have this button that I had made that you see there, and I wear that sometimes. Today I don't have her with me, but I do wear it often. The other person I wanted to highlight is Elizabeth Catlett, and I hope some of you have had an opportunity to learn of this artist's work, and also to see her work if possible. Just really fabulous, important kind of work. 20th century artist. She, let's see, I have her dates there. The 1915 to 2012. Did printmaking, but she also did a lot of sculpture work that's very important. And the art itself is, just really strong work. But what she said about her work, she had this engagement, this commitment to social political themes. And I love what she said. So this is a quote from her. Art can't be the exclusive domain of the elect. It has to belong to everyone. Otherwise, it will continue to divide the privileged from the underprivileged, blacks from Chicanos, and both from the rural, ghetto, and middle-class whites. Artists should work to the end that love, peace, justice, and equal opportunity prevail all over the world. To that end, all people take joy in full participation in the rich material, intellectual, and spiritual resources of this world's lands, peoples, and goods. And she kept with this kind of commitment to social engagement. So, there'll be many people, if you do get involved more in the art world, if you're already in it, there will be some people who say, art isn't political, and, don't be bringing that into things. And, I think that's just garbage. Art is political. Pretty much everything is political. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. The other artist I wanted to highlight is Carrie Mae Weems. This person is like a god to me. I admire her work a great deal. The Kitchen Table series, you should see it if you haven't experienced that. They had a wonderful showing of her work. Well, I guess it was at the Frist at first. I saw it at the Guggenheim in New York a few years ago, a retrospective of her work. The photography, museum series, and I'm not going to go into those particular things because we don't have time for that right now. But very important artist. What I wanted to highlight with her is that I went to this talk that she gave. This was in 2015 at the National Museum of Women in the Arts in DC. And I traveled. I was going to do some research in DC, but I made sure it happened at the same time that Carrie Mae Weems was going to be there. So they just all kind of came together as kismet. And because I was already a fan, so she's somebody I will travel to go hear Carrie Mae Weems talk. And what really impressed me in this discussion, she was talking about the relevance of, can art change the world kind of thing. She said, I don't care about a lot of things, but I've always cared about social justice. That resonated with me a great deal because I feel like I'm interested in a lot of things, but I'm not passionate about a lot of things. Some things I'm extremely passionate about, and social justice is one of those, and I feel like I try to apply that in my work all the time. It's just central to how I go about things, to my academic studies and to my work in museums. To any work I would do, I would always bring that kind of focus about social issues and trying to make things better. But at the same time, I didn't actually talk about that much with people. So I would not wear that on my sleeve, and I wouldn't wear it on a shirt, and walk into spaces and talk about it when I go to, even class. I wouldn't bring it up with professors. They might pick it up because of the topics I'm choosing and how I approach what I'm writing. I would definitely not bring it up in an interview for a job because I felt that these would be things that people would not appreciate. And I think that is true in a lot of ways. Like I said, I've been called a protester and activist by some people in the museum, the art museum world, and and they meant it in ways that were not good. So I used to not put that forward. But after hearing Carrie Mae Weems say that, I came back from that talk and thought, yeah, that is what I care about, and I'm actually going to just start talking about it. I'm not going to keep it this thing that I do on the side. And a lot of times I'm having conversations with people, other people I work with, and we're talking about this, and I'm actually going to put it out front and central. And that was partly because as a woman of color working at art museums, it's a pretty lonely place as a black woman. Not many black women or even just women of color as curators in the field. And that's, in some ways, I thought, that's why I'm not going to talk about these things, because I feel like this is not a space that's welcoming and encouraging for those discussions. And yet, I realized, well, I want this to be a different kind of space. I'm going to have to push these people, because they're not going to just do it. They're not going to bring this forward, is from what I could see from years of spending time with people in these art museums. They weren't going to bring it up. So I think I'm going to start doing it. And really, I want to be shaping these spaces and, being part of creating that discourse, being part of the dialogue, and rather than waiting for other people to shape it for me and me be a participant, I start seeing myself as very, like, I need to be up front and central. So when we think about museums, this is just showing kind of the demographics of the US. This is a little old, but it's still kind of, I think this is still relevant and current. So when we look at our demographics of our country, in the past it was more white, and we've been becoming a country of more of people of color over the years. And yet when you look at museum demographics, this is museums in general, the demographic is mainly white visitors, people who are coming to the museum. And that's definitely true for art museums. Very much so, and also it's usually older folks and people with money. So, however, as the demographic for the country is changing with these years now, there has been discussion in institutions about, wow, well, maybe we need to, change something up. We have to address about trying to encourage visitors of color, younger people, people from different socioeconomic groups to come to the museum. This is kind of reporting some of the lack of diversity in museums. So you can see the Mellon Foundation report from 2015 shows that this is art museums in particular. It's looking at leadership positions, and I've kind of highlighted what I mean by that. People who are the curators, educators, conservators, people in the business office, people who are running the institution, the ones who are really making the decisions about the institution, tend to be mainly white people. There are people of color, of course, who work in art museums. There's just not many of us, and when there are, a lot of times we are in roles like the janitorial and the security staff. That's a lot of the people. And then students, sometimes they don't get counted in these kind of reports, but they might be there in intern kind of roles, but they also don't have decision-making kind of, they don't have that kind of power in the institution. And then the other one is just showing New York City, and again, finding that mainly the leadership roles are mainly white. And New York City, as we know, is a very cosmopolitan place, and so it's something to pay attention to, the fact that the people who are leading the institution don't actually represent the communities. So my academic studies, I decided to focus on issues of race. So my work in art history is focusing on art of the United States, modern and contemporary. I look at issues of public memory, and a lot of people make the assumption that I'm doing African American art. I always like to be like, why did you think that? Did I say I do African American art? Because I'm African American, I guess they assume that I do that, and I do study African American art. But it's not actually how I have designed my studies. It's not the main thing. I study race and how it operates in art, in American art. And that covers various things. It talks about whiteness, things like that. So it's not just artwork produced by African American artists. A couple of initiatives that I started, I thought about, I'm going to try to bring my interest forward and also apply it. So the things, how I shaped my academic career, I wanted to apply that to what I was doing in museums as well. So one of the initiatives I came up with a friend, let me see here, it's called The Art of Black Descent. This is something, it's a collaboration. So I'll just go into how it got started. So in 2014, we just think back, that was the year that Michael Brown was killed, Eric Gardner and other people was just kind of, it seemed like every day I was hearing about something horrible. And I am a person that's on Twitter, as Professor Ringelberg mentioned, and I was watching people die. You know, like other folks in here, I'm pretty sure you saw this too, right? So you could see this on the news, but if you were on social media, you were literally watching people die on social media, and it was being repeated over and over. I started thinking, so at this point in 2014, I had just started working at Yale, and I was thinking, what can I do? I was a curatorial fellow in photography. How can I do something in my job that would try to create a space, a dialogue about talking about what's happening or something? How can I contribute to trying to make this country better? And so I spoke with my boss, and I saw that there was this initiative that started online called Museums Respond to Ferguson. Has anybody heard of that? Yeah, a few people have heard of it. Okay, cool. So this was a group of bloggers and people who work in museums that were kind of got together, and they wrote a joint statement saying, you know, museums need to be addressing these things. So this shirt, what do you have on? We're not the first people to say this, and we know that. A lot of people have been trying to push museums to kind of address social issues, and that year it definitely came to the forefront. I read that call and I thought, okay, yeah, I need to be doing something too. I reached out to my supervisor and asked her, you know, I said, I don't know what I want to do yet, but I want to try to create a program or something that would talk about some of these issues, and you know, I want to use art. And she said, that sounds like a great idea. You should connect with the people in the education department. So I did, and I thought it would, you know, I don't know. I thought a lot of people would want to do this, and I realized quickly that there was tension. Me bringing this topic up made some people very uncomfortable, and I think there was fear in the staff that the public, whoever came to the program, would be really upset, and we would not know how to manage that conversation. There was a lot of people asking, well, what will people say? And I was like, oh, I don't know exactly. I don't know what they're going to say. That's why it's a conversation, right? If you know what everybody's going to say, then it's some kind of script or something. So this isn't a script. But then I realized that was a problem for them. If they didn't know if they could not anticipate what people were going to say, they found it problematic. I was told that people felt that they didn't have any training in talking about race, so they couldn't do this. They couldn't do a program on this, and I thought that's ludicrous. I mean, most of the people there have graduate level degrees, and if we can't talk about race, and this is this major social phenomenon in this country and everywhere, how can you not be doing this, and you're not going to put any effort into doing it? And we work at a university. We have the ability to get books and things. People don't have to, you can get that when you don't work at a university. So it just seemed kind of weird to me. And also we were a very elite institution, and we have people who we can invite as speakers, and they can work with us. We can bring in trainers. So none of those excuses that I was getting to me were adequate. Eventually we were able to do a program, and it was only really after there was these protests that happened on campus at Yale in November 2015. So I brought this up in December 2014, almost a year later, after pushback over and over again, and I proposed several things. I had pages of ideas. They all got ignored. No, we can't do it. No, we can't do it. But then there was these protests that happened on campus about race issues. And then suddenly I got a call that we could do our program. It's like, do you want to do something? I was like, wow, a year later, okay. Yeah, and I did, of course I took them up on it. I actually got the idea for how we run this program. This is a dialogue center thing. It started out where I did this with my friend Gabriella Svenningsson, who were at that time, we both worked together in photography. She's still there. I got the idea to do this dialogue. I wanted it to be dialogue. I knew that ahead of time. But the idea for how we did it, I used this resource, the Sites of Conscious. Have you heard of the Sites of Conscious? It is a kind of a consortium, I guess, a group of museums from around the world. So it's a big thing. So if you're really into this museum stuff and human rights, you should Google them and look them up. So it's a bunch of places. So the Tenement Museum in New York is one of the institutions that's part of Sites of Conscious. The Robben Island, I don't know if that's the exact name of the institution, but Robben Island in South Africa, the museum that is built there that was where Nelson Mandela was in prison. That is one of the museums that's part of this consortium. So they basically are in places that are sites that are sites of trauma, things like that, or just kind of important kind of social relevance, places of important social relevance. And I went to a workshop they had at the National Council of Public History, if that's the correct title, NCPH. And when I was there, I learned this dialogue kind of method that they had, this framework. So I'll show you a better picture. This is a student talking about one of the artworks. This is better. Okay, so here you can see what we've done, and these are shots. So we started the program at Yale, and since then we've moved this out into bringing it to high schools and libraries because we had such a good response. So what we're doing basically is, I should have brought some of the Yale pictures, but I didn't bring those. We would put objects on easels. So at Yale we have fancier easels, that kind of thing. These are our ones that Gabriella, that's her in the front here in all black, and that's me over there with the red sleeves on, talking with a student at New Haven Academy last year. We bring art that is related to Black protest issues, and we basically put it up on easels, and it's all dialogue centered. We set this up, it's called the Art of Black Dissent. We talk about what's happening in the country. We ask people what they already know, and then we start showing them about how we can talk about art. So we give them a few tools about how to talk about, like basically issues of perspective, focus, where composition, things like that, because we don't assume that people will necessarily have those skills. And then we talk about what's happening in the image, and we ask questions the whole time. So it's a Socratic kind of method. And each time we do it, it's different. We don't know what people are going to say. And I actually love that we have no idea what they're going to say, and we don't know how they're going to respond to it. But we've had really good responses. I have found that this is a very challenging kind of program to do. It's not the typical thing at an art museum where you stand and you talk about something for 20, 30 minutes or something, and then people ask questions. You can actually probably figure out what questions they're going to ask. And sometimes they ask other ones, but in general, that's the standard kind of format. You know what you're going to say. It's much easier to do that. This, I find, to actually be rather exhausting. You have to really pay attention to people. I'm going to put that out there because you don't have to do that when you're doing those other kind of presentations. With this, I have to pay attention very closely, and then we try to weave what people are saying together. And so sometimes, like these are with classes, the students know each other. These students actually were, well, at least that one on the bottom, this group was a group that was different classes, like freshmen and seniors and stuff. They don't necessarily always spend time together. Those tend to be very different dynamic versus the ones where people do not know each other at all. They might be people at the library, and I just go up and talk to people and invite them to be part of this thing because I'm one of those people who does that. And it frightens people sometimes. But what's awesome is, like, you see this woman, she was really into this, and she started explaining why. I think she's talking about the one with the Trayvon Martin here. This is by Ricardo Morales, that print, why that was significant to her. And they really get involved in the conversations, how they take these things apart visually. And these are people who did not have any training often. Sometimes we have people that are art historians or artists, but a lot of times we don't. They come from all different backgrounds, and they just hear about the event, and they participate in it. And then we have these great conversations where we relate it to things that are happening in the city as well. So our public program at Yale started in April 2016. It was meant to be just one public program. When I finally got a date on the calendar, I reached out to several faculty and invited them to bring in their classes. So we did special sessions for classes. So we had done this 5 other times for courses. And because of that good feedback, then we applied for a grant and started bringing it to libraries and schools. And I actually find that this is probably the most meaningful thing I've done in a very long time. I love doing this program. It is work. I've spent a lot of money buying a lot of things, because when we did it with Yale's collection, of course, it was their collection. Then we decided to bring this out to the public. We use our own collection. We don't have really fabulous works like things by Glenn Ligon, which we used when we did it at Yale. But we start buying things in what we could afford, and sometimes we get some donations. And I just find it wonderful to see how people respond. I was thinking I was personally getting something out of this, and then I found that when I listened to how people in the community respond, an older gentleman who I kind of wrestled into doing this, I think he's not in, I don't know if I have a shot of that. I think I took it out. So we did this at Stetson Library in this black neighborhood near Yale. There was this older gentleman, and I asked him if he wanted to participate. He said he didn't have much time, but he ended up staying there the longest, of course. And he told us that he was very happy that we were doing this program because it was like a balm to his skin. And there was a moment where I was like, what? What is he talking about? And he said, it's like I have something I can put on me now, and it makes me feel good all over. And I was like, wow. Okay, and I just stood there and I was like, this is actually really meaningful to other people. I think and he said, I'm really proud that you're doing this, that somebody's doing this for us. And I didn't even know really how to respond. So oh, thanks. Yeah, I'm happy to do it. It's a very important thing to me. It's kind of one of the best things I've done. Here you can see how some of the students are responding. Sometimes they make signs and we take pictures and we put them on Instagram. The one at the far end, the students are thinking of ideas, things that they can do in their community to kind of take this discussion and apply it to their own spaces. This is a project that I plan to continue to keep going with. I feel like none of my actual work is as meaningful as this Art of Black Descent project. So I'm trying to figure out how to make this be more, or at least bring this kind of thinking to other projects that I do, to everything I do. The other collaboration that I wanted to mention is, that's just our, we have a blog where we kind of write about some of the stuff. I'm really behind in posting about it, but you can find some things about it on our blog. The other collaboration I wanted to point out is Museums Are Not Neutral. So this is something that started August 2017, and it really was one of my friends, Mike Morowski. He is a director of education at the Portland Art Museum in Oregon, and I follow him on Twitter, and I had been following him actually for a long time, and only the last couple of years I actually got to meet him. And last summer I saw that he was in a discussion with somebody, and he wrote, as a response to someone, well, museums are not neutral. He was just frustrated with people saying, the museums are these neutral places. And he said that, and I wrote him back and said, that should be on a t-shirt. And then he wrote me, separately and said, yeah, let's do it. You want to do that? Why don't we put it on a t-shirt? And that's how it started. And we thought we'll make the proceeds all go to charity. We don't get any money out of doing this. And I actually thought this will go on for maybe a month or something. It'd be over. It's still going on, and it's caught on with a bunch of people. Sometimes we get pushback from folks. They get really upset that we're saying that museums are not neutral. They think it's some kind of attack on them. They'll say, what are you talking about? The museum should be neutral. It has to be neutral. And I'm like, it's just not. I'm not even into shoulds and stuff. It's not. From the get-go, museums are not neutral constructs. They come out of a colonialist enterprise. They are not neutral. They are political. They are about power. It's just what they are. So this is, sometimes I hear this from people with graduate educations, and I feel like, wow, you really need to be careful about what you say. You should know the history, and I guess, anybody can make a mistake, that's fine, but we have to be kind of own up and really, start listening and paying attention to these things. We have to know the history of our institutions. And as an African American person, like I said, I spent years at some places in meetings where I was the only person of color, not the only black person, but just the only person of color in meetings for years. And when I bring up programs, I'm told that the things I'm bringing up are political. And we can't do that because this is a neutral place. The museum has to be neutral. And I'm like, what the hell is neutral about this? If I'm the only person of color in the meetings for years, how is this a neutral space? It's ludicrous. In addition to, it's not neutral anyway from the get-go. So I've kind of had it with that neutral stuff. I have a lot of stories about that, but we don't have enough time. so I'm going to let that one go. But basically, in this post that I put on my blog, I kind of am pushing back and talking about like why I really felt like I had to make a stand about it. And it's a first step, and we're not saying, neither Mike or I am saying that we're the first people to say this. We're not. Other people have said it. It's just that it's unfortunately some kind of dominant idea, especially in art museums. And people in the art museums, they really want to hold on to that. I think it's a way to hide. It's a way to mask a lot of the social problems. And so racism, the problems when we talk about people of color aren't coming to art museums and stuff, really bothers me a lot of times, the things that people say, well, why they aren't coming? Well, they just don't know about museums. You know, they don't have a background of going to these institutions. Yeah, a little bit maybe, but a lot of people don't go to art museums. Actually, most people don't go to art museums. A lot of people think these are elitist spaces and racist. And I have to say, actually, they are. I work in them. They are elitist and racist. Not the saying that everybody is that works there, but that's what the construct is, and that's how they've been set up. And if you feel like that, you're right. And I just tell people, let's try to change it. Let's get in there and mess with this stuff. Let's break that down. There's a lot of gender bias issues. There's a lot of class issues. They're able, you know, like we can talk about ability, kind of able bias. So the museums are not neutral, the whole initiative in a way, just by putting this on a shirt and starting the conversation and getting people talking, is our kind of way of saying time's up. Like, we're not taking that anymore. We're going to bring attention to that. And it's just the first part. It's not a way of solving all those things, but the first part is being honest about it and refusing to kind of let people have this neutrality myth to hide a lot of the problems in institutions. So, and those are just some artists I know. The woman in the red at the top is Kijo Lee. She worked with me at Yale, and now she's running, I think, the education at Cleveland Museum of Art. So happy of her, or she's one of the people. I think she's running that, or she's maybe the assistant in the education department. But yeah, it's been really fun to see people post their pictures on Instagram. So if you have one of the shirts, please post a picture. Use the Museums Are Neutral hashtag. So, if we want to get beyond talking and really move on to some actions, I think we can do that. So Museums Are Not Neutral is trying to do that, moving into like an education, because some people really don't know. They've heard that myth over and over. They think it's real. We all need to educate ourselves. We need to learn about the history of museums, think about current practices, and learn really what social justice means. One of the initiatives I started at Yale was a social justice reading group. And I learned that I made some mistakes in how I set that group up, and that I assumed people knew what social justice meant. Our first topic was to discuss empathy, and in that I realized, whoa, we need to back up a lot. Like, we tried to jump forward too quickly. There was a lot of certain kind of groundwork we needed to have done, and we hadn't done it. So it's something I plan to go back to. But yeah, we need to talk about what is social justice, what are the approaches, how do people do that work? Because it's not something that's common to hear people talk about in museums, and especially in art museums. So we have to kind of learn some of the stuff on the outside and then think about how we can apply it into the art world spaces. I highly suggest that we all think like artists. Artists kind of embrace mistakes. You know, they try things that they don't know. And I find that a lot of people that I've worked with in the art museum world don't want to try new things, especially not in a kind of public platform, because they feel like they need to know all the answers ahead of time. I feel like we should be working as partners with publics. We are also the public. It shouldn't be this outside-inside kind of dynamic. We need to think of ourselves as being partners, and we're all in this together, we're working it out together. We need to spend time imagining, what do we want? What do we want our centers to be, instead of thinking, well, this is just the way it is. So, and we can get really weighed down in the problems, and I find myself doing that sometimes, and my colleagues, and sometimes I'm like, let's just dream a little bit. What do we want? And then we can start strategizing for building that. I think we need to spend much more time doing that. Find people, collaborate, build some solidarity, and really work across lines. Don't think you can only talk to people, and if you're in curatorial or whatever, you just talk to curators or something. You will have the most boring conversations. Talk with everybody. Talk to the security guards. They know tons of stuff. The security people are like amazing. They know tons of stuff. Work with everybody. Visitor services, like across people in finance. Everybody's got something to bring to the table, and that's the way you build change. Because sometimes often, I would say most of the time, you're not going to get the people at the top to just go, oh yeah, that's cool, let's just change all of these things and be social justice oriented. They're not going to do that. But we can start building a culture of that and work with community members, people who don't work at a museum, visitors, work with everybody, because we need people to start demanding that the institutions change, because they won't do it on their own. Empower yourself. You have to really get that education, learn things. It's an ongoing process. I've actually been reconsidering a ton of stuff in the last 2 or 3 years. Stuff that I used to say now, I'm like, oh God, I can't believe I said that. I don't think that's the way how I should be going forward. And the whole diversity conversation and stuff, I've been changing a lot about how I use certain terms. Challenge museums. So learn how to dismantle whiteness in our institutions, sexism, the heteronormativity, hope I said that right, elitism, and expect opposition. So when you get people who are like, they're shutting these things down, don't go in there and be like, oh God, it just didn't happen, I'm so surprised. Expect it to not happen. They're gonna push back. They're not gonna wanna change. That's not what they're gonna wanna do. You have to almost be anticipating what the responses are gonna be and be ready for those. And that's why if you work broadly with lots of people, be connecting with donors, be connecting with everybody so you can start changing the culture of that institution. Develop your critical praxis. And what I mean by that is think about what you're thinking and actions. Actions and what you're thinking have to kind of go together. And you need to tell your story. All of us, especially if you're doing this work, it can be really lonely. I know a lot of people who do this, but often it's just like a couple of us in various museums all across the country. And it can feel very alone. You can be building, working to build solidarity with people, but it might be that those people aren't as invested in it as you are. It's so important for us to publish. So I feel like I need to do a lot more work in that area, just kind of so many projects going on. But I do try to share this stuff on social media because that's a kind of a fast, quick way for me to get information out there. But we really need to start putting those in other kind of spaces and getting them published in journals. So important. I was going to talk about this a little later, but I'll have to talk about that later. Next one I want to show. And I can send you any of these slides if you guys are trying to write these down. I don't have time. I can send you this. So this got a lot of stuff on it. And this is what drives me crazy when people say, well, people of color are just not in museums. They don't know about it, and they don't have the credentials. They don't have the kind of training. So we need to have a diversity fellowship. And then they're kind of done. I've heard that over and over again. That's why they're not there. They don't have the skills. They don't have the knowledge. They're not familiar with this. And if we build a diversity fellowship, we're kind of done. That's an assumption, and it's a very dangerous assumption that the museum itself is fine. It's just people of color that are lacking. We're missing something, we need to be trained. And I'm like, oh, it drives me nuts. Diversity fellowships are great. I'm not gonna put those down, that can be awesome. But you should be doing a whole lot of other things. You should look at hiring practices in the institution and look for exclusionary kind of practices. A lot of times people are working with networks that they already have, which are already exclusionary networks. You want to provide, and I haven't seen this much, actual training about issues of race, privilege, intersectionality. If you had that for all your staff, that would really be changing the culture. Nobody really wants, Dr. King has a great quote about not wanting to integrate into burning houses. I actually think of museums as kind of like burning houses in many ways. Nobody really wants to work in places that are, horrible. If a place is racist, and you already know it's going to be like that, why would you even want to work in it? It's not about, we just don't know about museums. A lot of people think they're racist and elitist spaces. We need to try to change the culture inside the institution. And there's problems in the institution. It's not just other people. Create productive mentorship opportunities. We could, mission statements. Hardly any actually talk about equity in them. That's usually not considered a key value of institutions. I'd like to see that change. We need to make inclusion and equity, and I feel like we can have a long conversation about these terms like inclusion and stuff. I'm still kind of like gritting my teeth a little bit, but I did leave that. I took diversity off of there. It was on the slide before. we need to change the professional accreditation criteria. This is where we can be making some changes by working together across the institution and then working across institutions and then going to places like AAM and starting to demand to change things so they make it an accreditation issue, like requirement. Funding criteria often usually does not mention anything about inclusion and equity. But again, we have to lobby to be changing those. If you look at foundations, you'll find that foundations have, where people are getting grants and stuff, they often have similar issues, the same kind of demographics that museums have that is very problematic. So we need to create boards and foundations that are composed of people who come from various backgrounds and also have an anti-racist platform. Very different. It's not just about putting people of color in certain positions. We need people who are fighting racism, not people who say that they're not a racist, but people who are against racism, because there's no such thing as not a racist. You're either against it or you're okay with it. You're fine. You're a racist. So we need people who are anti-racist. We need people to understand that that is an active position. We need to be working with our next generation. So I'm so excited to be asked to come here talking about the art history students and every other student and people interested in museums. I think this is a really important way. I definitely work with, collaborate with people who are already in the field, but I think we can really be starting to change that culture by working with the training when people are in, going to school and getting training. I think that's a really important place to start talking about these issues and start focusing on how to dismantle these things. I didn't get any training on what to do when you experience racism. I sometimes reported issues and had people just kind of go, well, that's just the way it is. When I said things, and I said to one person, I said, I don't know if I can really be in this kind of art museum world because I'm finding this to be really horrible at times. I actually said to someone, I can't breathe. And that was a moment when I was like, damn. And I'm not trying to be exaggerating, but what Eric Gardner said, I cannot breathe. I can't breathe. I sometimes cannot breathe in these spaces. And the person I was speaking to just said, well, yeah, it's probably going to be like that at other places too. And she was done. And I just sat there and went, well, wow. Okay, I guess that is honest. It is probably going to be like this, but what about changing it? She's done. I'm not done. I do know a lot of fields have a lot of these same issues, but none of us should just be cool with just leaving it like that. So yeah, whatever. So we have to figure out how to dismantle these things. We need more community-centered approaches as well, and think about, again, going back to that stopping with the whole museum is outside of the community. Our museums, all of us who work in museums or visit them, we're all part of various communities. We should all see ourselves as partners with others. And I like to think about a museum, the walls. I was saying this earlier today with one of the classes, is we think of the museum walls as Swiss cheese. They have holes in them. We've punched holes. I want to see all holes. I want to see this as a porous kind of space. It's in and out. It's not this, well, we're separate from them, that kind of approach. Some resources. This is so cool. I still am reading this. This Journal of Museum Education from March 2017. Lots of really good kind of examples in here of people doing work and focusing on race, equity kind of issues. Lots of good stuff. I'm always meaning that I've been starting to write notes. You can see I have proof, but this is it so far. And there's tons of good stuff in here. So definitely, if you have an opportunity to get this, you can also find these articles online. Some of them are free. You don't have to buy the actual journal. And then I have a list that I started, and actually a lot of people have been contributing to it. That's really great. So that's another collaboration kind of thing. I put this as a Google Doc, and it lists articles, stuff about museums are not neutral, just lots of stuff that's happening in museums, issues of racial equity, sexism, and how case studies are what happens actually in museums, and then some kind of more general kind of overview resources as well. So lots of stuff is on there. What else did I want to say? Oh, I want to end with this. Dr. King, I want to make sure to honor him. This month, he was assassinated 50 years ago on April 4th. So just recently, last week, right? This is a picture from my desk. I don't know who that photograph is by. It's on the postcard, it doesn't say who the photographer is. But this is something I think, I have it out, and I look at this and I just love how he has his hands folded like that. And to think about all the very serious, weighty kind of things that this person was considering, and how he really, put his life, he dedicated his life to this work. So I think, my work is definitely not doing as much as many of these people, like I'm showing Dr. King and I mentioned Ida B. Wells, but I think it's important work that all of us can find our way. We can find what work we can be doing, and it's also important. And people like Dr. King and Ida B. Wells, these are people that inspire me and help me to keep going, because I know they put their life, they dedicated their life to this work. And the Now is the Time is from his speech. So he gave this speech in 1963, first in Detroit, and I think it was called the Great March or something, and then at the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom in August later. And the first time he gave this speech, I think he said, "Now is the time." He said it like 9 times. And then when he did the speech later, that people often talk about this "I Have the Dream" speech, when he gave that address, I think he said it like 4 times. And he has that wonderful voice. It's like, "Now is the time." I'm not good at emulating him, unfortunately. "Now is the time." But he's just so great. Like, it's slow, and it makes you really, it's just something to stick in your head, to meditate. Now is the time to be doing this work. It's not next year, 10 years from now, maybe somebody else will do it. It's right now, and it's on you. You all, like, each of us has something we can do, and it doesn't have to be giant, big, grandiose things. I know I'm not doing anything super like Dr. King did, I'm not putting my life on the line, but I am putting myself out there, so this is important work, and I'm going to stand by it. And all of us can do that in some kind of way. And I think it's getting past feeling afraid to not speak up because we're afraid we're going to miss out on job opportunities. Do you really want to work in spaces that are that messed up? I don't. I want to be trying to change them. So I'm putting it out there quite clearly. I don't expect everybody else to do it in that way, but I do hope that all of us kind of take on some of that charge, because now is the time. So thank you.